And thank you so much, Dorset Jabari, live for us. We just had to cut that short because we're seeing the night sky be lit up by airstrikes in the Gaza Strip. This conflict is now almost hitting 2 days, and we had expected such a flare-up. That is a live picture of the Gaza Strip as we head into the second day of this conflict. On Saturday morning, Hamas launched a wave of rocket attacks and fighters stormed into Israel. It was the deadliest day in 50 years. We've just had word that more than 700 Israelis have been killed in this conflict in the past 48 hours and 370 Palestinians. Fighting between the two sides continues. Hundreds of civilians. That is quite an incredible scene there that we're seeing. Bright fire lighting up the sky of Gaza. Let's just see if there's any sound that we can hear on that feed. OK, we don't have any sound on that audio. We have heard that the Israeli government has declared all-out war, and those are pictures that we're seeing of a declaration of war. Civilians, 2.3 million Palestinians live in the Gaza Strip, and as we're watching those pictures unfold, I want to bring in Al Jazeera's senior political analyst, Marwan Bishara, who joins us live from Paris. We've mentioned that the Knesset has declared all-out war, but you would argue, Marwan, that the war has been going on for decades.
Well, the conflict certainly has been going on for decades, and clearly the 55-year occupation is by definition a system of violence. It's a very violent system. Perhaps it's slow violence, the kind of violence that the cameras for the international media cannot catch on a moment-to-moment and day-to-day basis because it's not exactly dramatic. It doesn't make for good TV. But clearly an occupation that goes on for 50 years plus that continues to repress people in their daily lives is, quite violent. In comparison to this, it's, of course, very different. This is very dramatic. The images, the people killed, captured, injured, and so on and so forth, right? And so, of course, when it bleeds, it leads. And I think one of the goals, objectives of provocations of that nature, where they do lead to bloodiness of that, it's usually people or organizations who are totally invisible to make themselves visible. One of the objectives in an asymmetrical conflict is for the weaker party to make itself known, to make itself present, to make itself, to impose itself, if you will, on the political agenda in the region and beyond.
Marwan, we knew that Israel was going to increase its level of attacks. It had urged the evacuation of people near the Gaza Strip. We're seeing strikes from the air on our screen at the moment. The dark night sky has been lit up by these recent airstrikes, more than a dozen, I would estimate, over the past hour. What else could we see in terms of a military response from Israel? Is it likely that we could see it invading from the ground?
We must emphasize once and again, and it's probably going to be with us for the next few days, we might as well start. This is not a conventional war. And if you and the rest of our viewers around the world are watching, what are we watching exactly? It's night and the Israelis are bombarding, and that's the end of that. This phase of this war, as it were, right, is Israelis bombarding basically an open prison called Gaza. Now, of course, Hamas, which is basically de facto in control there, have carried the attack yesterday and does shoot rockets towards Israel. But it is the kind of asymmetrical warfare in the sense that Hamas is not an army, Gaza is not a state, and we don't have something that is symmetrical between two equal parties. We have a very advanced, very powerful country, a nuclear power country, Israel. On the other hand, we have a guerrilla movement, a liberation movement of sort, that basically exists in this open prison, this refugee camp called the Gaza Strip. So Hamas did try to
interrupt
invent
you there,
new
only
ways and
because we're
means.
seeing quite incredible scenes coming from Gaza. So do stand by. That was Marwan Bishara, our political editor for Al Jazeera. Let's bring in Tareq Abu Azzoum, who is actually live on the scene in Gaza. Tareq, can you explain what you're hearing, witnessing, seeing?
Right now, the Israeli occupation forces are targeting different areas in the northwest of the Gaza Strip. Now, the occupation forces are adopting and applying the principle and the strategy of the fire belt, in which the Israeli occupation uses it to generally facilitate the process of its ground invasion by destroying every single area close to the borders, specifically in the areas that are considered to be eastern and close to the adjacent also settlements. In retaliation to the Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip, the Palestinian resistance started launching barrages of rockets towards the Israeli cities. As we can clearly right now see in the Gaza Strip, the sky of the Gaza Strip is witnessing various kinds of clashes, exchanging fires between both parts. Now the process and the level of tension is accelerating and spiking rapidly without any gradual, let's say, de-escalating for the current situation. Now, as we can see, as we can clearly hear right now, the sound of the Israeli fire jets that are hovering inside over the sky of the Gaza Strip and are launching different kinds of airstrikes. Now, different areas, as I can right now here, that have been targeted extensively by the occupation air raids now. And if you can concentrate on the scene in every single place in the Gaza Strip, you'll find out there is a fire hole that has been generally made by the Israeli occupation air forces.
Do you have any concept of what the targets are at this stage? Can you see which buildings have been hit?
Actually, the targets considered to be residential houses that are close to the eastern borders of the Gaza Strip, in which the majority of its dwellers have been evacuated after receiving notifications from the Israeli army to evacuate these places. Now, usually this approach has been applied by the army in order to ease the process of the ground incursion into the Gaza Strip. This comes generally after the press release that had been stated by the Israeli ministers and the Israeli chief ministers, who said that now it's the time for war inside the Gaza Strip. So I think clearly, and everyone can see that the level of escalation now is getting much more higher, and the coming hours might be really hard for Palestinians.
We always knew that it was going to be a tense evening, that people in Gaza were going to have to prepare for a tense night ahead. What, if anything, can they do to protect themselves from an onslaught such as this?
Now, all of the, let's say, 70% of the Gazans are now, let's say, secured in the houses. They just don't have any safe shelter except the Onawa school, which now had been fully filled with the displaced Palestinians who evacuated the houses earlier this day. And the majority of them, they have now no hope except like they want to live in their houses peacefully, being away from the Israeli strikes. But main in fact now, the Israeli strikes are everywhere inside the Gaza Strip. Every single corner in the Gaza Strip right now witness different kinds of strikes, which really give the great and general impression that the situation will witness massive deterioration within coming days.
Tareq, I just want to give a recap to our audience who's just joining us. What we know at this stage is that the number of Israelis killed has increased to 700 since Hamas launched its biggest attack on Israel on Sunday. Hundreds of civilians and soldiers have been shot and killed as fighters stormed in. There are towns and cities in Israel which have been infiltrated by Hamas, and the Palestinian group has breached the Gaza barrier at several entry points. What we're seeing now is Israel targeting Gaza, and I want you just to paint a picture of what's happened in the past hour or so. How many strikes have you heard and seen, and what do you think that the targets are?
Generally, the numbers of a strike had been intensified during the early beginning of this day. Like, it passed more than hundreds of strikes that had been targeted on civilians inside the Gaza Strip. Some kinds of, let's say, the quality and the kinds of targets were varied from residential towers, commercial banks, shops, and even civil infrastructure, besides targeting some military sites that belong to the Palestinian militant groups. And it's important to mention that 90% of the political and military leaders of the militant groups, Aqsas, have been targeted by the occupation forces since the early beginning of this conflict. It seems that the situation is really spiking, despite the fact that regional mediators are trying to convince both parts to self-control and to de-escalate the wave of tension.
I'm just hearing on your microphone there, Tareq, that there's just been another explosion. If we can just take a wide shot, I want to see, if we can, how close that is to you.
All right, I will now ask the cameraman to take for a wide shot for the Gaza Strip right now. Actually, you can just move it to that place or to this side to see the level of explosions that really took place. Due to the corner of the to the angle of the camera.
We're just going to go to a quick break before we go to our next program. You're watching Al Jazeera and our rolling coverage of the conflict between Israel and Gaza. Do stay with us.